What do South Carolina women's basketball fans need to look for in the Gamecocks Sweet 16 matchup against the Indiana Hoosiers? I'll be talking about that and a whole lot more on this Friday edition of Locked On Gamecocks.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I'm Angeline, the host of this podcast, and also a staff writer for Gamecock Digest over on SI.com. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch for your team here today. We are free and available both on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. This episode is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. Got a lot to dive into on this Friday edition of Locked On Gamecocks. Gonna talk about some work that Lamont Paris has been putting in when it comes to the transfer portal. He has an official visitor now coming to town this weekend and made the top 6 for another top transfer portal prospect. We'll talk about all that later in the show. We'll also talk about Joyce Edwards, the skill set she'll be bringing to Don Staley's women's basketball program, and why, offensively speaking, she is going to be a great fit for this team. But we're going to start off today's show with a preview of South Carolina's Sweet 16 matchup against the Indiana Hoosiers. And obviously, I couldn't talk about this game all by myself, so I decided to get Jacob Goins on the show to talk about the Hoosiers, the battle between Kamilla, Cardoso, and Mackenzie, Holmes, and what he thinks is going to happen at the end of the day. So, don't want to hold you up too much longer. Here's my conversation with Locked On Hoosiers host, Jacob Goins. Welcome to this crossover edition of the Locked On Gamecocks and the Locked On Hoosiers podcast. It is officially Sweet 16 time in the NCAA Women's Basketball Tournament, and South Carolina and Indiana will be taking on one another up in Albany later today. And to talk about this matchup, I'm pleased to be joined by Locked On Hoosiers host Jacob Goins. Jacob, how you doing, man?
I'm great, man. It's great to be on with you. Great to meet you, talk with you here for the first time, and a wonderful crossover between two schools that don't always compete and don't really see each other a whole lot. But when we talk about women's basketball, we're talking about two of the best.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that, Jacob. That's part of the beauty of the NCAA tournament is we get a lot of matchups that we usually do not see, both on the women's and the men's side. And one of the matchups in this game between both teams, I think it's going to be quite entertaining to watch, and probably one of the best individual matchups of the entire Sweet 16 is Kamilla Cardoso and Mackenzie Holmes at the 5 spot. Two of the better front court players in all of women's college basketball this season. Cardoso has been just a half rebound shy on average of a double-double this year, shooting 58.4% from the floor and averaging a whopping 2.55 blocks per game. Mackenzie Holmes, she's pretty much the engine for the Indiana Hoosiers on their side, averaging 20 points on 65.7% shooting, 6.8 rebounds, and 1.55 blocks per game. So, Jacob, just give me your overall thoughts on that individual matchup. What do you think about it?
Well, look, I mean, Cardoso is obviously, that's the player you think of when you think of this South Carolina women's team. She's the one that they go to. She's the one that makes them go. And she's one of the most well-known players in women's college basketball, where we're in an era where that's been the biggest it's ever been, right? Talking about names that the average Joe, the average fan begins to know, which is a really cool thing for the women's game. And Mackenzie Holmes is right there with her, an All-American from Indiana who's played her heart out and played her final game in Bloomington back in the round of 32. And so the matchup's going to be really, really interesting to watch. They're two similar players, but Andrew, they're also kind of different, where Mackenzie Holmes doesn't have as much size to hang with Cardoso, but I think her skill set is going to match up well. And look, you're talking about two of the best players in the game going at it in the Sweet 16. What more could you ask for? It's exciting. I think Holmes is going to have to find a way to get around Cardoso and not just go straight up because, I mean, again, she's kind of limited on the size when it comes to Holmes versus Cardoso. So if she can be a little bit shifty, she may have to be more of a facilitator in this game, right? Where they throw it in and then pass it out to some of our knockdown 3-point shooters like Scalia for the Hoosiers. So if she tries to go one-on-one and just straight up under the basket, I just don't know how it's going to play out for us.
Yeah, Jacob, I completely agree with your points there. If Mackenzie Holmes tries to go straight up against Kamilla Cardoso, it'll be good night, Irene, for Indiana. I mean, you're just not going to get anywhere with that strategy. So, yeah, a little bit of sort of pick and pop, maybe throwing it inside and throwing it right back out. That might be the kind of strategy that the Hoosiers will have to implement in that matchup. Now, speaking about this game from more of a broad sense, Jacob, if Indiana is going to win this game, what is it that the Hoosiers are going to have to do to pull off the upset?
Well, it's what you have to do in any game when you're trying to pull off an upset, because that's what this would be. It's a 1 seed and a 4 seed. It's the odds and everything, the predictors, the matchup, whatever you want to look at. Indiana is the underdog. We are the team that's not supposed to win this game. And the two things I think you have to do, rebound the basketball and shoot it really well. Those are two things that we have done a fantastic job of doing all season long, but there haven't been many teams that we've seen like South Carolina who are just dominant day in and day out. And I'm not even saying we have to win the rebounding battle, Andrew. I'm saying we just got to hang around. We just got to compete in the rebounding. Don't get beat by 15 or 20 on the boards, because if that happens, we're done for. And with that rebounding, you have to be able to shoot the basketball. If you get an offensive rebound, kick it out and knock one down from 3. And we're going to have to shoot some shots in transition, shoot shots and make them in the half court, and really just make South Carolina earn everything they do on the offensive end and wear them out defensively. So, yeah, if we can rebound the ball and shoot, we're going to be in a good spot. Doesn't even mean we'll win the game. We just have to do those things to hang around in this because, look, we're a really good team, but South Carolina day in and day out just plays on another level, and hopefully we catch them on an off day. I'll be honest. We got to maybe catch them on an off day, which doesn't happen very often for that South Carolina women's team.
Yeah, Jacob, for South Carolina, they have not faced, a ton of front court talent, like high-end front court talent this season. When you look in the SEC, you look at Rickea Jackson from Tennessee. Obviously, she's one of the biggest names in that regard. And then Angel Reese over at LSU. South Carolina has had their moments this season, maybe like a half or so, where they didn't bring quite the intensity to the glass that their opponent did, and it did keep their opponent in the game for that particular contest, especially facing LSU. So, yeah, I, again, totally agree with your point there. If for South Carolina, besides just trying to make sure that you take care of things on the glass, I think for the Gamecocks, they got to make sure they don't turn the ball over. For South Carolina, a team that is just so full of talent on their roster, sometimes they could still get a little bit lackadaisical. Raven Johnson, she is a great change of pace guard for South Carolina. When people think about South Carolina, they might still think of South Carolina of old, which is basically just, we're going to have our 2 post players go on the low block. We're going to throw the ball up to them, and we're just going to try to let them go to work. Right. South Carolina's still willing to play that way at times, but they're not quite the same team in that regard. Raven Johnson is a guard that likes to run transition. She wants to run the floor, and she wants to try to find an open teammate to get some quick, easy points for South Carolina on that end. But sometimes it does also lead to poor decision-making, and there's been a couple games this year where it's added up enough to where it allowed an opponent to hang around. And obviously, in the tournament, you can't allow that to happen. You can't let the intensity and pressure of the game get to you. So that's going to be, in my opinion, the deciding factor for South Carolina if they want to walk out with a win. But speaking of walking out with a win, Jacob, let's get into our final predictions here for this game. How do you think things are going to play out?
Well, it's going to be tough. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And I'll say this, I've been talking a lot about this on Locked On Hoosiers and our women's basketball segments. I disagreed with us being a 4 seed. I think we should have been higher than that. I think we were better than that. And our very slow and short run in the Big Ten tournament probably caused that. But we were also dealing with injuries to Mackenzie Holmes, who was our best or is our best player and wasn't really active there. So I just don't think a 4 seed was all fair, but it is what it is. And now you got to go up against the best team in the country. And so that aside, because you can't change that, here we are in the tournament. We have to do all of those things well that I said, rebound and shoot the basketball. And if South Carolina turns it over, we take advantage of that pretty well, better than most teams do in the women's game. And even if all of that goes well, we still might lose. I think we're going to hang around, and I think we're going to be competitive. But look, it's a really tough game. And South Carolina is just uber talented, extremely well coached, so disciplined coming out of the SEC. I want to pick the Hoosiers. I really do. My heart tells me to do it, but I got to go with my head on this one. I think South Carolina will probably get it done. And look, I think they're going to go on and win the national championship. So it's nothing for us to hang our hats or hang our heads on if we come up short, because again, I think South Carolina probably has the best chance to win it all.
Yeah, Jacob, it definitely did surprise me that Indiana came out as a number 4 seed when the bracket was released a couple of weekends ago. And, looking at this game, I mean, I don't really disagree with you. I think South Carolina's going to win this game. I certainly don't expect the Gamecocks to just blow Indiana out like in the first quarter or second quarter like they did against North Carolina this past Sunday. I don't think we're going to see a game like that. I think things will be kind of close in the first half. And then that third quarter, I think South Carolina's really going to start taking over and imposing their will at that juncture. So I think it'll be a good game, but I do think that South Carolina comes out on top as well. So, Jacob, it's been great chatting with you, man. And for all of you who are looking for more content on women's basketball for the Hoosiers side, be sure to check out Jacob over at Locked On Hoosiers. And for Indiana fans, come on over to Locked On Gamecocks if you want more information on South Carolina as well. Jacob, thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Great to talk to you. We'll have to do it again soon.
That was a great conversation there with Locked On Hoosiers host Jacob Goins. So Gamecock fans, again, if you're interested in getting more information on the Hoosiers women's basketball team, please be sure to go and check out his show on YouTube or wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. But sticking with Locked On Gamecocks here, we're going to continue to talk about women's basketball and specifically their top flight signee that's going to be joining the program in just a few months, in Joyce Edwards. We'll talk about her skill set in a bit more detail in just a couple moments. Before we do that, I want to let y'all know that today's episode is brought to you by the spring cleaning champions, Manscaped. This season, make sure to groom your carpets and the drapes with the leaders in below-the-waist grooming. Clear out that winter brush with Manscaped's Lawnmower 5.0 and watch your confidence bloom like the springtime flowers. Their 5th-generation trimmer features 2 interchangeable next-gen skin-safe blade heads, a standard one for taking a little off the top, and a new foil blade to go smooth wherever your heart desires. Hate making a mess? There's no need to worry. This bad boy is waterproof. You can shave in the shower, in the bath. Heck, you can shave in the ocean if you really want to. Embrace the season and join the 10 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with our special offer. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code LOCKEDON at manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping with the code LOCKEDON at manscaped.com. Nothing like a little spring cleaning in your pants. Today's show is also brought to you by Better Together, the first cooperative daily fantasy application that offers a familiar experience for existing daily fantasy sports players with a social twist. You can play with a friend or a teammate in general. It provides a sense of camaraderie and enhances the social experience of watching sports. And it's a great way to stay connected with friends both new and old when gone are the days of watching sports together in person. It also can put your group chat to the test and give yourself a chance to get some bragging rights over some of your other friends. Download Better Together now from the App Store and sign up using promo code LOCKEDON for a chance to win your share of over $1,000 in cash prizes. Remember the code LOCKEDON because winning alone is fun, but it's better together. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Joyce Edwards was bestowed a great honor on Wednesday morning as she was named the Gatorade Girls Basketball National Player of the Year. Again, the highest honor that any athlete at the high school level can get for their respective sport. And South Carolina fans have known this for a while. The Gamecocks are just adding to the insane talent pool that they have on their roster with Joyce Edwards now joining the fold. She is rated the second best prospect in the entire country per ESPN Hoop Girls rankings for the 2024 class. And when you look and watch some highlights from Joyce Edwards and watch her game specifically, it's pretty easy to see that Joyce Edwards is going to be a perfect fit for South Carolina's offense. Joyce Edwards stands at around 6'2". She pretty much plays in the front court. She's probably going to be playing the 4, I would say, in South Carolina's offense. And she's got all the skills required to thrive at that position in South Carolina's offense. Firstly, Joyce Edwards can finish through contact. And obviously, this has been a staple of South Carolina's front court over the past several years. Having players that can just always find a way to get the ball through the hoop, whether it's the first time or the second time around. They've always had players in Dawn Staley's tenure, especially in the last 5 years, that can handle the physicality in the paint area in order to get the job done. And Joyce Edwards, she's just another player that is going to be able to handle that kind of stress that position is going to bring. So that's already a good sign for Joyce Edwards. But Joyce Edwards is not just somebody that's just going to play within 5 feet of the basket. She also does possess around, I would say, a 15-foot jump shot, which is good for her because, again, you don't want to be so concentrated in the paint area. That will therefore eventually allow opposing teams to sort of narrow in their strategy on where they need to be sure that they're all over you. And if you're Joyce Edwards and you don't have a jump shot, then obviously the simple answer and solution at the college level would just be, we're going to bring double teams, weak side, strong side, whatever the case may be, and we're just going to make it almost impossible for you to get the ball up and force you to have to throw the ball back out. But Edwards can play face up to the basket, and she can shoot around 15 feet away from the basket. She does not necessarily have a three-point shot, but because she's playing the 4, she doesn't really need to have a three-point shot. Leave that to South Carolina's guards and their wing players. Joyce Edwards is not going to have to worry about that, at least for her first year or two at South Carolina. Also, Joyce Edwards has a high motor, specifically on the offensive end. I'm not saying she doesn't have it on defense, but from what I was able to see, it really shows up on the offensive side of the ball. And this is going to really mesh well with South Carolina's current personnel, specifically point guard Raven Johnson, who, as we have talked about several times on this show, is a change of pace guard. Raven is a guard that loves to run the floor. She wants to get out in transition. And especially this past season, when Raven was on the floor with a Letitia Amihir learned very quickly, Raven is going to always have her foot on the gas pedal when she's got the opportunity to do so. And so Letitia and Raven, they built a great rapport with one another because Letitia, being very athletic for playing the 4 spot, she would just run the floor pretty much every single time she saw Raven running out in transition because she knew she was probably going to get a chance to get an easy layup or bucket at the other end. Joyce Edwards, in my opinion, is going to have that same kind of relationship with Raven Johnson on the floor because, again, she is going to run the floor at her spot. And with South Carolina now being a team that can attack you in a bevy of ways offensively, I think that that's going to work really well with South Carolina's current starting point guard. And the last thing I want to bring up is this. Joyce Edwards, she's got pretty good passing ability for her position as well. In one of the videos I watched, I believe that it was the state championship game from this past basketball season against Wren High School. I saw a couple highlights where Joyce Edwards was basically still on the defensive end of the floor. She got the ball in her hands and she threw up like 3/4 of the court length passes to a teammate, and it allowed them to get an easy bucket on the other end. Now, I'm not saying she's going to do that all the time while she's at South Carolina, but it shows that Joyce Edwards, she's got really good court vision. She knows what she can handle in terms of trying to get the ball to her other teammates. So, in South Carolina's offense, you think about Kamilla Cardoso. Everyone nationally talks about Kamilla as this person that, just goes up for the ball, just basically throws it up off the glass 3-4 times over, however many times she needs to, before she finally gets a bucket. But Kamilla is more than that. Kamilla also is a great passer. Heck, you look back at the LSU game from this year on the road. Kamilla got the ball on the low block, saw Bree Hall wide open in the corner, and fired it out to her fast enough and cleanly enough to where Bree Hall was basically able to catch the ball, gather, and shoot before an LSU defender could get out there, and she swished that three-point shot, and it wound up being sort of the backbreaker for LSU that helped put South Carolina over the top. And that assist came from South Carolina's center. Joyce Edwards, in my opinion, is going to have that same kind of passing ability at her position when she becomes a part of this program. And again, her teammates are just going to love her even more for that, because she's not just going to be this ball-dominant four player that every time she touches the ball, you might as well just start jogging your way back to the other end because she's not even going to look your way. That's not the way Joyce Edwards is going to play. She is going to look to try to get her teammates involved as well. So, honestly, this was my first time really watching Joyce Edwards highlights and what it is that she can do. And again, with all of these skills and traits that she has, athletically speaking, and in terms of her skill set from a positional standpoint, I think that South Carolina fans are really going to like Joyce Edwards from the very beginning. Besides the fact that she's a South Carolina native that's staying at home, I think that she fits this offense really well. Doesn't mean she's going to start immediately, of course, because obviously the way that Dawn has it in her program, even if you're an upperclassman or a lowerclassman, you have got to earn your minutes. You're not just going to have it handed to you. But Joyce Edwards, no matter what, she's going to make a really good impact for this team from the jump when she arrives later on in the offseason. Now, speaking of offseason, Lamont Paris, the men's basketball team, unfortunately, because of their early exit in the NCAA tournament on the men's side, they are already going through their offseason activities. And that means that for Lamont Paris, he's got to find some more players to get into this program, specifically transfers, after losing guys like Talon Cooper, Michi Johnson entering the portal, a couple guys in your front court are gone as well. And Lamont Paris is starting to really put in some work, particularly at the guard position. And there's a couple positive developments to discuss in that regard. We'll talk about that in a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show in this week's March Madness Bracket Highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest. Just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs, these guys were able to take it to the next level. The Alabama Crimson Tide can only be described as a Nissan Pathfinder. They've been thrilling to watch and have really created a lane for themselves entering the tournament as one of the hottest teams in the country. After taking down North Carolina in the Sweet 16, they'll look to battle Clemson to earn a trip to the Final Four for the first time in program history. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Welcome back to this edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day in just 30 minutes. The success of this past season is already starting to pay off for Lamont Paris and South Carolina's men's basketball staff. As we've talked about already a couple times over the past week, South Carolina had a great year. You lose a couple guys via graduation, eligibility exhaustion, and the transfer portal. And so now you've got some slots that you got to fill in. And one of those slots is the point guard position specifically. And I've said before in terms of needs, the Gamecocks have got to find a guy that is a proven facilitator. And it seems like that Lamont Paris has narrowed his focus to two different guards. The first one I'll bring up here is Furman transfer J.P. Pegues. And literally, as I was getting ready to finish up my script for this show, I went and saw some news from Gamecock Central. They were the ones that reported this, and maybe it was the BigSpur.com from 24/7 Sports as well, who also covers South Carolina. Point being, those two sites both reported that J.P. Pegues is expected to take an official visit to South Carolina this weekend. So obviously, Lamont's connections to the Southern Conference, his experience from that conference is paying big-time dividends in that regard. Pegues obviously playing in the state of South Carolina the past couple years up at Furman. South Carolina's staff has probably been able to keep a close eye on him as a guy where it's like, if he enters the portal and we need another point guard this next offseason, then we've got a guy that we can look at here. And J.P. Pegues, he averaged around 18.5 points per game. No, he averaged about 4 assists and I believe 4 rebounds per game as well. He was a do-it-all player for Furman this past year. And the Paladins, they had a bit of a down year. They didn't make it, I think, too terribly far in the Southern Conference tournament. Obviously, they didn't make it in the NCAA tournament. But J.P. Pegues, he was sort of the guy that put the team on his back on several occasions this past year. And I think he's obviously looking to go to a situation where he can play at a high major school, but also a spot where he's not going to be expected to have to carry the load every game for his squad. And obviously, if he goes to South Carolina, he would not have to do that. You've already got a Colin Murray Boyles on this roster. As long as he sticks around, Miles Stute is a solid three-point shooting wing player. And you've also got some other guys on this roster as well, veterans like a Jacoby Wright, a guy like a Zachary Davis as well, who can play some defense and, can cut to the basket on offense. So the point being, J.P. Pegues, I think that there's a lot of reason to be intrigued with South Carolina if you're a person that's in his shoes. So he's taking a visit this weekend. Keep an eye out on any reports that come out of that. Maybe if South Carolina does well enough, it's one and done, and J.P. Pegues commits right off the bat. Another guy to keep an eye on here is UT Martin transfer Jordan Sears. Now, Sears, I want to say, has played point guard for the Skyhawks the past couple years. Not entirely sure if that's the case, but he is 5'11", so I'm kind of just assuming there. But Sears, just like Pegues, very productive guard from the mid-major level, averaged 21.6 points per game this past season, 9th best mark in all of Division I basketball. He also averaged 4.5 assists per game, tied for 88th in Division I basketball. So, Sears, he is a guy that can both score for your team, but also get your teammates involved, or the other guys on the team involved. Now, the reason why I bring him up is South Carolina, they cracked his top 6 group that he released on Instagram yesterday. The top 6 including, obviously, the Gamecocks, Alabama, LSU, Texas Tech, West Virginia, and Arizona State. A very interesting mix of squads there, but it seems like that Sears is very intrigued by the idea of playing in the SEC for what I believe would be his final year of eligibility this next season. Obviously, as evidenced by the fact he's got South Carolina, Bama, and LSU in that top 6. Sears is rated as one of the top prospects in the transfer portal right now. On3 Sports has him ranked 50th out of everybody that they've got in their database, and 24/7 Sports has Sears rated the 28th best prospect. So definitely some variance there, but the point here is Jordan Sears is viewed by evaluators as one of the top guards in the portal at this moment in time. So South Carolina already getting a visit from J.P. Pegues out of Furman, and then Jordan Sears apparently very interested in South Carolina as well. Lamont Paris is already putting in work in the transfer portal. And who knows, again, if things go well over the next 5-7 days, you might see a couple of commits fall South Carolina's way. And especially when it comes to their backcourt, they definitely need to get some guys there because, again, you lose it to Talon Cooper, who was a great facilitator for you this past year, and obviously his experience played a big role in the amount of wins that you got. And then Meechie Johnson, a guy that, listen, sure, he was a bit streaky as a shooter at times, but when Meechie was on, there were very few guys that could stop him in the SEC. So a lot you got to replace there in different ways. And JP Pegues and Jordan Sears would definitely address multiple needs at those positions should the Gamecocks land either one of those guys. With that being said, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. Hope that y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show. As always, what are your thoughts on the women's basketball team's upcoming matchup against the Indiana Hoosiers? What are your thoughts on Joyce Edwards winning Gatorade National Player of the Year in girls basketball? And what she's going to bring to South Carolina this next season? And lastly, what are your thoughts on these recent developments for South Carolina's men's basketball team in the transfer portal? No matter what your thoughts are, let me know down below in the comments section if you watch today's show on YouTube, or you can shoot me a direct message on X at @ALion_SC if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app. But as always, thank y'all so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Friday and a fantastic weekend, and I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.